Okay, it's 10:32, so I'm going to kick it off. So good morning and welcome everyone. This is Jim Rooney. I'm President and CEO of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the team at the Chamber, I hope you're all joining us today feeling safe and healthy. As we continue, like everybody else, to adapt to this unprecedented time, at the Chamber, we're committed to serving not only as the voice of our region's business community, but as an information source, providing answers to questions that our members in the business community have. And in that spirit, today we'll hear from leaders in the labor and employment community who will lead us in a discussion and help us get a grasp on all that's changed through this COVID-19 crisis related to the way that business interacts with its employees, existing law and legislation that has changed the way that we interact with employees. I want to start with a few notes, including a thank you to our webinar sponsor, Bank of America. Bank of America is a long-standing partner with the Chamber of Commerce and our Government Affairs Forum and in so many other ways. And as I'm thanking them for sponsoring this event, I also want to thank them and the entire business community for the way that they've stepped up to provide contributions to retool and make necessary PPE that our hospitals need, and in so many other ways to help with this crisis. But early on, Bank of America made substantial dollars available to its community partners that are serving on the front line. So thank you to Bank of America for not only sponsoring, but for stepping up in a big way in this crisis. I want to flag for everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared on our website, bostonchamber.com. And we will have an opportunity for questions. There is a Q&A feature on the webinar for those who are participating that way. Please be sure to send your questions to all panelists. For those who have dialed in by phone, you can email questions to chamberprograms@Boston Chamber. That's Chamber Programs, all one word, at bostonchamber.com. With that, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. First, we have Rosalin Acosta, Secretary of Labor and Workforce Development for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In her role, Secretary Acosta manages the Commonwealth's workforce development and labor departments to ensure that workers, employers, and the unemployed have the tools and training and resources needed to succeed. Prior to joining the Baker-Polito administration, Secretary Acosta was a widely respected financial and banking service professional with over 30 years of experience in Greater Boston's financial institutions, so she has been on the employer side. We're going to break this session up into two parts. After Secretary Acosta briefs us and takes some questions, we'll hear from two of Goodwin's law partners. I'll introduce them now so we can have a smooth transition during the session. First, we have Christina Lewis. Christina is a partner in Goodwin's employment practice, representing employers in all facets of their relationships with employees and across a range of industries. Additionally, Christina conducts seminars and training programs on a variety of employment topics, including discrimination prevention, and is a certified trainer in both fair employment practices and sexual harassment prevention by the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. Joining her is Brad Smith, also a partner at the firm's employment practice. Brad represents a variety of local, regional, and national clients across many industries, including high-tech, pharmaceutical, B2B, real estate, utilities, manufacturing, financial services, and retail. Brad's practice includes employment discrimination proceedings before state and federal courts and agencies, wrongful discharge litigation, and non-competition and wage our misclassification litigation, among other areas. So we've got a group of people that live in the world of labor and employee relations every day. We're so thankful to each of you for joining us. And with that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Acosta for some remarks.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to all our employers that joined today, and greetings to my fellow speakers. We're all obviously living in a very different world right now, where we're doing everything virtually. So here we are. I just want to give you a little bit of a landscape as to what we're doing and how we're working with this new situation we find ourselves in, not just with the enormity of the volume that we've received, and specifically I'm speaking right now about unemployment. As you know, the unemployment claim volume, as you saw in last week's report, we had about 147,000 claims last week. And just to put that in comparison, in the full month of February, we had a little over 17,000. And I will tell you that volume has not abated whatsoever. And our claimant volume for this week will be published on Thursday morning at 8:30. So we're obviously in a place that our workforce was not ready for, number one, the volume, and number two, the social distancing required to deal with this virus. So we have the cataclysmic challenges of the virus and the volume, right? So before we entered March and we were in that 17,000 claimant world, we had about 50 people, 50 people in our call centers taking calls, sitting a foot and a half away from each other. Once this began, obviously, it was very important for us to get our workforce working remotely. We have about 400 people in the Office of Unemployment. And as I was saying to Jim before we started this call, a very, very tiny percentage of those folks even had laptops to go home with. So we had to quickly not just get our folks the technology they needed, but also quickly ramp up and scale. So our call center has been closed now for the past couple of weeks. And the reason for that is because we really could not see ourselves opening a call center with 50 folks and getting volume of 25,000 calls a day. That just would frustrate everyone. So we are in the process right now of ramping up by the hundreds. We are increasing our staffing so that we can open that call center as soon as we feel ready. So just wanted to give you sort of a lay of the land and appreciation of some of the things that we're working with. At this point, secretariat-wide, we have about 1,200 folks in our secretariat. Over 90% of them now are working remotely, and some essential personnel cannot work remotely. But we have most folks doing the proper social distancing and being safe or working from home, which was critical to us to make sure that our workers remain safe and out of harm. With this increased volume, obviously comes the need to have technology capacity, and I can say that fortunately, our UI online system has withstood the volume, and that is unlike many, many states in the country where they have seen their systems crash on a daily basis and have not been able to bring their systems back up. Because we went to the cloud about 2 years ago, we have been able to sustain the increased flow into our UI online system. So right now, our folks are working with people that are filling out contact forms because the call center is closed. We have contact forms on the website for people to fill out, and we are calling them back. We've called back about 25,000 people over the last several days, and as we continue ramping up our staff, those calls will continue going out. one of the things that we have done, and there's a lot, I'm going to give you some website links so that you have resources to look at. But one of the things that we decided to do early on, a week ago last Sunday, we started doing some virtual town halls because we don't have a call center open, and we know that there's that energy out there that people absolutely need to talk to someone. We've had over 70,000 people participate in these virtual town halls since last week. We've been holding them daily. We've held 2 in Spanish and planning another one in Spanish for this week, hosted by myself, and then we have a customer service person in the background, and then we have other folks that are not speaking on the virtual town hall, actually solving people's problems live. Again, we felt like we needed to offer that service because the call center right now is not operational. There are a lot of things going on in terms of benefits. All of you know, I believe, that the CARES Act was signed by the President a few days ago. And one of the things that we are absolutely encouraging people is to just be a little patient with that. The CARES Act covers folks that traditionally are not eligible for unemployment, such as the self-employed, folks that are paid by 1099s, anyone that has recently exhausted their weeks of unemployment benefits, and those in the past who have not had sufficient earnings to qualify for state unemployment. And the CARES Act also extends the number of available weeks of benefits for all claimants and supplements all claimants' weekly benefits amount by $600 per week. Now, we don't have guidance yet from the feds, from the Department of Labor, as to how, what are the business rules and some of the eligibility requirements and exceptions and technical requirements for this CARES Act to be implemented. And until we get that guidance, we really can't stand up the program. We are, however, busily looking at how best we can do that. Our business application for the UI online system is quite old, and we're looking at options on how most quickly to stand up this CARES Act, since we know it's a temporary program, and we also know that it needs to be out to the public very quickly. But right now, we're urging folks to please not apply if you're a self-employed or 1099. Or you fit into any categories of the CARES Act, do not apply in our UI online system because it's not the proper vehicle at the moment. I wanted to just give you a couple of websites for you to go on to get the latest information on everything to do with unemployment and COVID-19. And I'll share those with Jim so he can send out to you. But it's mass.gov/unemployment/COVID-19. And if anyone is interested in participating, any of your employees or family members or friends that are unemployed or interested in participating into any of the town halls, they can also go into that link and sign up for one of our upcoming town halls, which we'll be holding every day this week throughout the weekend. So, Jim, I'm just going to stop there. There's a lot more to talk about, but if you want to ask me some questions or have the audience ask questions, happy to take a breather here and answer questions.
So, great, Secretary. Thank you for that overview. As you were talking, a couple of questions occurred to me. One is, as you said, no one was ready for this, particularly many of our government organizations, and you're ramping up now in terms of the call center. It occurred to me that maybe there's ways as you ramp up that the business community can be helpful in that regard. Is there anything that we can do by way of providing resources or skill sets to help with that as you ramp up for the volume of calls that you will get and that volume of applications that you will get? Can the business community help you?
So thank you, Jim. And we actually are working with several from the business community that have actually come in and volunteered for some consulting work. Obviously, this is a whole different kind of workforce model, right? And another thing that Jim and I were talking about before this call started was, imagine a traditional workforce that manages by walking around, manages by seeing people. Now there's a whole new skill set that's needed, right? A whole new skill set that's needed to manage folks remotely. Not just manage folks remotely, but manage probably 5, 10, 20 times the number of people that those folks managed before. So, we have some consultants that are with us that are doing some pro bono work that we really appreciate. We're also working with a private company to do a remote call center, give us some remote call center staffing that we've already contracted with. So the business community has been fantastic in reaching out to us and providing us resources that we currently don't have.
Great. So if there's anything else that you need that maybe we can connect someone with you on, just give us a call. You mentioned the CARES Act, and obviously that provides a big infusion of unemployment money for people that will be necessary. At the same time, Massachusetts has its own UI fund. Talk about the relationship between the two, and what effect will that infusion of federal money have on the balance of the Massachusetts UI fund?
Yeah, so Jim, good question. So everything in the CARES Act, whether it's there's an extension of benefits for 13 additional weeks, the additional $600 per claimant per week, and the addition of these non-traditional UI claimants, self-employed and the 1099s, folks that have exhausted their benefits, all of that comes from federal money. So that does not touch the Solvency Fund. With that said, the amount of volume that we are getting definitely puts us in a recessionary position with our Solvency Fund. And we will need to borrow money from the feds, within sometime in the very short future, to be able to cover our current claims.
Okay. So, again, back to the volume question, and employers naturally don't want to be in the position of having to lay off employees, but sometimes they're faced with that reality. So as they do go through that process, can you talk a little bit about employer responsibilities with respect to the layoff process and
yes.
People applying for unemployment?
Yeah, so there are some, and I sent Jim for all of you on the phone a PowerPoint presentation. It's a resource guide really for, it talks about our work-share program, which is really a layoff aversion strategy for employers that, out of absolute necessity, need to reduce employees' work hours. So the work-share program allows employers to seek an alternative to layoffs by retaining their trained employees, reducing their hours and wages, and that can be partially offset with UI benefits. Again, there's a resource that Jim will send you, but it's on our mass.gov /workshare.com. That's where you could find our employer guide. We have a rapid response team that will work with every single one of you to talk to you about how best to avoid layoffs if that is your goal. And we provide immediate on-site, well, not on-site anymore. It used to be immediate on-site services, but we now are providing the services to employees in a virtual way. But I do urge you to take a look at that, because that could be one way that businesses can avert layoffs. And also, there are other supports. The Family First Act that was just passed offers paid sick leave and expansion of family leave, and that may also help prevent layoffs if employers use those resources. And there's guidance of that on that also in the resource guide I sent to Jim, as well as a variety of business loans through the SBA.
Great. As I said, you know, most businesses don't want to lay off, obviously.
No.
Yeah. But if they need to let someone go temporarily, but know they want them and they need them back when, for example, restrictions. Can you talk about options and maybe in doing so, you know, the difference between layoff and furlough, and you know, if an employee, for example, is furloughed, can the individual apply for unemployment if they're you know, furloughed for just a short period of time?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Jim, and we have certainly many claimants that have walked through the door right now. Historically, before we filed our emergency regs, if you file for unemployment, you must look for work, you must be available for work. Obviously, in this new place we find ourselves, those are not logical requirements to have. So, if an employer needs to furlough or lay off their employees for 30 days, 60 days, however long the shutdown continues, yes, absolutely, that employee can apply for unemployment, and we're waiving the work search requirements on UI, so that employee would be eligible for unemployment.
Great, great. Can you talk about the rapid response and work share programs, and maybe talk a little bit about how employers can work with your office? I know you're doing the town halls, 70,000 people, amazing. You know, how can employers work with your office during this crisis?
Yes, and I think the best way for employers, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, you know, the rapid response team is very responsive, and they will work with an employer to customize whatever it is they're trying to, whatever their goal is. So if your goal is to not lay off your employees, but you need to reduce your hours, what does that look like? How, you know, what percentage of your staff do you want to lay off? Do you need to lay off? Does it make sense to do work share, or does it make sense to just completely lay off your staff? So our rapid response team will go through those scenarios with you, work with you to come up with a plan, and make sure they guide you to the proper resources and guide your employees to the proper resources, so that at least during this time you reach your goal. I mean, I know so many employers don't want to. You know, we spend so much time finding talent. We spend so much time, you know, recruiting and the cultures that we create. We don't want to lose those, and we don't want to lose those because we're in the situation that we're in right now. So you want to retain those folks. You want those folks back. But if your revenue sources aren't coming in, it's understandable that you would have to lay them off. But calling them back is perfectly fine in this new world we find ourselves in. Even if the employee knows that they are going to go back to a specific employer, they still would be eligible for UI today.
Secretary, you mentioned that the CARES Act addresses a group of people that under normal circumstances would not be eligible for unemployment benefits, you know, independent contractors, self-employed, gig economy people. You also noted that you're waiting for guidance from the federal government. We had a call yesterday with some folks on small business loans and grants, and I represent the regional administrator for SBI, and they're too waiting for guidance, waiting for process information. I think the expectation now is that the banks will be accepting SBA loan requests starting Friday. At least that's the goal. I guess a couple of questions embedded there. Any sense of timing? And given that this opens up a whole different group of eligible people, what's your thinking on how to process claims from people that are in the gig economy and independent contractors and people that would normally not be filing claims?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's a big number. It's a big number in Massachusetts. I mean, it's anywhere, 350,000 potential folks filing, which is a big number. So we hope, Jim, to be getting guidance from the federal government this week. By the end of this week, they did not commit to us that's what would happen, but that's what they were aiming for. Obviously, we need to stand up a system pretty quickly because this is a temporary grant, right? A temporary program, I should say. We are working really hard to figure out how most nimbly and quickly to set up a system to be able to pay folks that are really not in the UI world at all. They're not in the traditional UI world. We normally pay folks that have W-2s. We have wage data. We're able to chat with employers and get employer information from those employees. That does not exist here except for in the Department of Revenue. So we're working with several agencies across government to figure out what the best way is to stand up this program quickly. Because folks are going to expect this money fast. I mean, once we get the guidance, I think the general public is going to expect they're going to get checks the following week. We've asked the federal government to please make sure they message that correctly, because there's no state in the country that has the ability to process the CARES Act without standing up a program. So I would say that we're still a little bit a ways from that, Jim, but we're working on it right now.
Okay. We have a question. We talked about the rapid response team and the workshare program. I'm sure this will be in the information you send me to send out. But how does one get in touch with the rapid response team?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways. I mean, there's a number I can give you right now, but the website is very simple. It's literally mass.gov/rapid-response, and there you will see the phone number of our Mass Hire BizWorks representative, which I can give you quickly. It's 1-800-252-1591. And we will set up some time to speak with an employer when they give us a call.
Great. And maybe just a couple of wrap-up questions. You mentioned the 70,000 people attending the town hall. What's the top questions you're getting from people during those town halls?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jim. Our system is a little older, so not as intuitive sometimes with the questions that are asked. But some of the top questions are, things like, password resets. I need to reset my password. I made a mistake on my claim. I need to reopen the claim. How do I do that? So some of the questions are fairly straightforward, and we've packed them into like four different categories. We have FAQs also on the website, so we've continued to add FAQs as we get the same questions over and over. We've added more answers and more claimant handbooks to our website. So I do urge our listeners to go to our website, our just mass.gov / even just DUA. That's our unemployment site. We've got a lot of information there. We're changing that and updating that website every single day. There's also the most updated information on our Twitter at MassLWD. We keep that updated multiple times a day. So there's lots of information out there on the website, and the town halls really have helped us also with making some coding changes, because if folks are having the same problem over and over again, is there a way that we can, code our system in the back to get rid of those issues and not have those issues continuously be a problem?
Okay, and one final question, and then we'll transfer to our shift to our speakers from Goodwin. But you and I had a little bit of a conversation before we started the call about lessons learned and future of work, and we're all making, I guess, mental notes of some of these things. But how do you think about that? What kinds of lessons are you notebooking right now in terms of not just the way that your team operates, but generally about the nature of work in the future, given our experience in this crisis?
Yeah, Jim, I think all of us on the phone are drinking quickly from a fire hose right now and really, reacting to what's happening. But, I think it's a little bit unknown as to how this really is going to change the way that we work moving forward. I think that we have, we've also seen, the possibility that there's a lot that can be done remotely. It doesn't feel great because I think we're social creatures and we do like the social aspect. I certainly miss my team tremendously and miss being around them. But I think one of the lessons, that we've certainly learned is, look, number one, you have to be ready from a technology perspective. We needed to be a lot more ready than we were. Now we are. So it does really open up a lot more possibility of being able to offer different work situations to our workforce that we really did not have the ability to do before. I think that it's certainly made us all a lot smarter about working on vehicles like we're working right now, like doing this WebEx. We had never done a virtual town hall before with claimants. We've always had claimants, but we've never obviously had this load of claimants. But we never thought about doing a virtual town hall before. We learned that there are better ways to access the public, perhaps, than we were open to. So I think this is really forcing us to a different way of thinking. I also hope it's going to make everyone a little kinder. I think it's really, we all care about each other, but there's a different sense of caring right now that we have. We're worried about our coworkers. We're worried about, our friends. We're worried about our family members. I think there's a different sensitivity that we all feel, and I think that's a good thing. If we can take something away, it's that awareness of others and their life and their lifestyles. But I think from the business perspective, there are going to be some changes. I don't know what they all are right now. But I think we're going to all look at our day-to-day pretty differently once we get out of this place that we're in, and I'm really hoping that that's going to be sooner rather than later.
Well, Secretary Acosta, thank you for that uplifting final message and for making the time to talk to us today. Thank you for your leadership and the leadership that we're seeing out of the Baker-Polito administration during this crisis. And thank you for the willingness to communicate so easily with the business community during a crisis. Very helpful to all of us.
No, thank you, Jim, and thank you to all for listening. And if there's anything our office can do, please reach out. If there's anything that we're missing, if you have any suggestions, we're open to that. We definitely want to make sure that we're meeting your needs and meeting the needs of your employees. So with that, Jim, thanks again for the invitation. And I'm probably going to sign off, Jim, because I've got another call I need to jump on.
Great. Thank you, Secretary.
All right. Thank you.
So we're going to transition now to the second part of this call. And for those of you that joined late, I'm going to briefly reintroduce Christina Lewis and Brad Smith, both partners in the Goodwin employment practice area, both very experienced and knowledgeable people. So I'll turn it over to Christina and Brad.
Thanks, Jim. First, we just want to thank the Chamber and the Secretary for her very helpful and excellent presentation. You heard the Secretary mention a couple of times the Families First Coronavirus Response Act that goes into effect tomorrow. And so we thought we would start by just giving a brief overview to make sure all the attendees are aware of what those obligations are. And then I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Brad Smith, who's going to talk about some of the things we're getting constant phone calls about right now, as you might imagine, reductions in force, furloughs, what are strategies for dealing with the economic crisis, and how does the new CARES Act impact those decisions? And so I'm going to try to do that briefly because we know we've got a lot of questions. And although that's what we're going to give an overview of, we encourage questions of all sorts because I know employers are grappling with a lot of different issues. And Brad and I would be happy to answer anything related to the virus and the proper response to handling situations involving the virus. So just very briefly on the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. As I mentioned, it goes into effect tomorrow. And under the act, the employees are going to be able to take paid sick leave. For full-time employees, it's up to 80 hours of paid sick leave. And it's for a variety of reasons that are related to COVID-19. So for example, employees can take leave because they're subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order, because they have symptoms of the virus, or they've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine, or they're caring for a family member who meets any of those criteria. And finally, they can take leave because a child's school or daycare is closed, or their normal childcare provider is unavailable as a result of the virus. There are caps for how much an employee can earn while on sick leave. If they're taking leave for their own individual purposes, it's $511 per day and $5,110 in the aggregate. If they are taking leave to care for an individual or a child, it is $200 per day and $2,000 in the aggregate. And as most of you know, there are tax credits under the statute to sort of mitigate the costs of that paid sick leave for employers. The second piece that I just want to make sure is on everyone's radar is that statute did amend the Family and Medical Leave Act to provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave for an employee who needs to care for a child because the child's school or daycare is closed or because their child care provider is unavailable. That is also has a wage cap of $200 per day and $10,000 in the aggregate, but it is job protected leave and it is a new kind of leave. It is temporary. That type of leave will expire at the end of this year. But what may be of note to some of you that are listening to this is that normally employers with 50 or fewer employees do not have to comply with the FMLA. Here, everyone that has 500 or fewer employees will have to comply with this particular type of leave. So with that, I will turn it over to Brad to talk about some of the issues that we know that you're facing with respect to the economic consequences of this.
Thanks, Christina. Secretary Acosta just briefly referenced, obviously, some tough decisions employers are facing, including whether to conduct a layoff or a furlough. Most of you know that a layoff, generally speaking, is a permanent termination of employment, and a furlough is a temporary cessation of employment with an expectation that the employees will be reemployed once the pandemic is over. Keep in mind that there's a number of issues that employers have to confront when considering either a layoff or a furlough. And again, furloughs can turn into layoffs too. We understand that employers may initially intend that the cessation of work will be temporary, but it very frequently can morph into a permanent layoff. Most importantly is that if there's a permanent layoff, that the company makes sure that they're complying with any of the plant closing statutes. The most prominent one is the federal statute, the Workers Adjusted Retraining Notification Act, or WARN is the acronym. And generally speaking, companies that are terminating at least 50 employees, and where the entity employs at least 100 employees, they have to consider whether or not their event constitutes either a planned closing or mass layoff. And if it does, generally the company is obligated to give 60 days of advance notice. There is, however, several exceptions under the WARN Act for emergency circumstances, including the unanticipated business circumstances that we're facing right now. But in that instance, what's important is that the company give as much notice as they can. Reality is that the more days that go by, the less likely it's going to be that an employer is going to be relieved from giving no notice. Because to the extent that the shutdown was inevitable and they knew it was coming and they knew a week ago, 2 weeks from now, they're going to be a little bit behind the eight ball in terms of giving notice. That's an important issue. In addition, employees who are furloughing employees, if they're furloughing them, generally they have to consider, what about health benefits? Many employers obviously provide health benefits, medical and dental and vision benefits to their employees. It's important that the employer check with the insurer to make sure that any requirement that an employee be regularly scheduled and providing a certain number of hours a week to qualify for coverage, that qualification is being waived. Now, for the most part in Massachusetts, most insurers are waiving that requirement, and they're not requiring, therefore, that employees be placed on COBRA or given their COBRA benefits that they have to pay themselves. So that's one way of really, frankly, developing some good loyalty with your employees. Obviously, continued healthcare during this crisis is absolutely paramount. It's key for employees. And to the extent that the company is willing to continue them on active coverage and, in fact, perhaps pay the premium during this period without any employee contribution, our experience is that that's a very beneficial way of being able to extend something to employees who are on furlough and not eligible. Now, Secretary Acosta reviewed the increase in unemployment benefits that will be available, including through the $600 federal grant per week. Keep in mind that the cap on unemployment benefits in Massachusetts is $823 a week. Plus $600 is $1,423 a week. Note that that amount of benefits is the highest rate of any state in the country, and by far. And so Massachusetts does have a very generous, relatively, unemployment benefit structure. And employees, obviously, many employees who are paid, for example, under $100,000 a year, around $75,000 a year, can be put in a position where they're close to, replacing, almost 80% of their base pay. And so again, that can be very helpful. A few things quickly about the CARES Act. One thing that wasn't highlighted was this Paycheck Protection Loan Program. There are loans that are available through the Small Business Administration, the SBA. Generally speaking, employers have to have less than 500 employees, although your eligibility is determined by looking at the industry classification code system, because there are different eligibility levels for different codes. Now, the loan program provides a loan of up to 2.5 times the employer's average monthly payroll, meaning the entire payroll across the company for 2.5 months. However, keep in mind that anyone who's compensated at a rate greater than $100,000 a year, the amount over $100,000 is not considered in determining the average. But those loans that are coming from the federal government are forgivable so long as they're being used for a specific approved purpose during the 8-week period from when the loan is received. And those purposes include payroll, paying employees or making it up, but they can also include for things like rent, mortgage interest, utilities, and there's a number of other approved purposes. That loan forgiveness program is is a very, very significant opportunity for businesses that find themselves unable to operate and are looking for that. There are some requirements, including that by June 30 of this year, that the employer has to restore employees who may have been laid off or furloughed and restore their income base as well by that period. You don't have to make it up. So any employees that were reduced during the period, so long as that number of employees is returned by June 30 and their compensation is restored by June 30, again, no back pay, but just restored on a prospective basis effective June 30, then there's no deduction in the amount of forgiveness that can be applied. So that's also we've got numerous clients who are calling us and saying, look, we think we qualify. We want you to help us work through how we qualify, how we get this this loan, so that, and how we assure that we're falling into the category that 100% of it will be forgiven down the road. So that's significant. In addition, there are emergency loans to mid-sized businesses with more than 500 employees. There's also various tax credits that are available. So there are a significant amount of programs through the federal program that are available to assist businesses of all size during this crisis, frankly. So that's kind of a quick overview of the key provisions and the things that we're seeing most frequently. Jim, any questions that
yeah. Why don't we shift to questions? Question about furloughed employees and relationship to other benefits. So if you do furlough an employee or a group of employees, can they benefit from sick leave and emergency FMLA while they're on furlough?
Well, to the extent that they are furloughed and are getting no pay from the company, yes, they would be eligible for any accrued sick pay that they have available through the company, because keep in mind, their employment relationship is continuing, even though they're not active at the time. And so to the extent that they have an accrued benefit, such as sick pay or disability pay, and many times, to the extent they otherwise qualify for that benefit, yes, that they can use that during the furlough. There are some impacts. It can offset against unemployment. Keep in mind that a furlough employee who's collecting sick pay, generally speaking, is not also going to be eligible for unemployment benefit during that period. So it can impact those. And an employee needs to do a careful kind of cost-benefit analysis to make sure that they're falling into the category of pay that they're eligible for that maximizes the take-home pay that they're going to receive.
Okay, what about FMLA? Same thing?
Well, if they're on FMLA, they're not going to qualify for other benefits such as unemployment or these special benefits, because if they're receiving an FMLA pay benefit, whether it's whatever type that Christina described, they can't double dip at the same time. As soon as that FMLA benefit ends, however, they will be eligible for transfer onto unemployment.
Okay. So let's talk about a couple of other employee kind of management issues. Those in the crisis communications field encourage constant communication with employees, keeping them up to date, having that relationship with your workforce, even if you're working virtually these days. I guess a two-level question. Any advice as to the do's and don'ts of that communication in a crisis like this? And a more specific question, if one of those employees happens to contract the virus or reports to you that they've been exposed to a person with the virus, what are your obligations?
Well, first, just real quickly, I'll take the first half of that, and then I'll ask Christina. Christina will answer the second half. But the first half, to the extent that there is communication that's coming from a company, to a furloughed employee who's not being paid, and the employee actually provides services, responds to a lengthy email and says, look, here's the status of the different projects that are going on. Here's what we need to do for follow-up. That employee is providing services to the company. And technically, under the wage laws, they have to be paid for that. Now, an employee who's paid on a salary basis, the rules are very clear. If the employee provides services to the company during any work week, that employee has to be paid the entire salary for that work week. And that's because an exempt employee under the wage law is required to be paid their full salary for any work week in which they provide services, regardless of the quantity or quality of the services that are provided. So employers have to be thoughtful about communicating with employees as a result of that. Many employers that we're looking at who are furloughing employees are temporarily suspending their employee access to email because they want to make sure that managers who are working are not inadvertently, communicating with them, trying to get updates and therefore creating wage liability for the company. And Christina, do you want to answer that second half?
Yeah, sure. As I understand the question, Jim, that it's what do employers do if an employee tests positive? What's the obligation to the other employees? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah. In terms of communication. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously, if this is outside the furlough context now, where you think you may have employees who have been in contact with someone who's tested positive. And the right thing to do in that situation is to inform employees that they have been in contact with someone who has tested positive. You do not want to disclose the specific identity of the person who tested positive, but you should disclose that someone has tested positive and that those employees should start to monitor their symptoms. There is guidance that has been published by both OSHA and the CDC on what businesses can do under circumstances like that. And they include everything from, how to clean the office and which disinfectants to use and what to do about employees who may have come in contact, which is essentially encourage isolation. So I would encourage you to take a look at those if an incident like that happens.
Okay. Another question from the audience, asking for more detail regarding companies with less than 50 employees. So the question is, are companies with under 50 employees required to pay leave for employees who have lost childcare or whose child's school has closed?
Yeah, so go ahead, Bob.
No, please, that's Karen's, please. Or I'm sorry, that's your family's first.
Yeah, so the answer to that question is yes. Yes, they are. Those obligations come under two places when it's childcare, both under the paid sick leave law and under the emergency family and medical leave law, which, as I mentioned before, is up to 12 weeks. Again, those wages are capped. And again, there is a tax credit that employers can apply for to help offset those costs. But yes, even employers with fewer than 50 employees are required to comply.
Great, thank you.
Keep in mind too that the extent that the company has furloughed an employee who's still an active employee but not working right now, but still on benefits, for example, and the employee then all of a sudden it becomes sick or needs a child care. There's a question whether or not at that point the employee is eligible still, because as an active employee for those benefits that Christina just described.
Yeah, well, Brad, I'll say this: the DOL has now come out to say that employee would not qualify if they're furloughed when the need arises. The Department of Labor has now made it clear they're not going to be entitled to either the family medical leave or the sick leave benefit, but they would be entitled to unemployment.
Many businesses and people whose business is office-based are working from home now, and in the age of technology, we're adapting to that. A question about employees who are, for whatever reason, either their function or some technology issue or whatever, are unable to work from home. So you've adopted a work from home policy and someone can't do what they do from home, do you have to pay them?
Generally speaking, no. If the employee is home and the business is closed, the employee is furloughed, they're not able, the company can make a determination in that instance whether or not the employee should work remotely. If the company says, look, we need this employee, it's a critical function, we want them to work remotely. If they are, then they have to be paid. If they're not working remotely, either because they don't have the resources to be able to do it or the technology to do it, or because their services are not needed, then they're not eligible or the company is not required to pay them. And their sole issue there would be for them to collect unemployment.
So that's a judgment call about, do you want to keep this employee or do you furlough or lay them off, I guess, right?
Correct. Or some companies also do salary reduction where they'll contribute a part of the pay. Keep in mind, though, that in Massachusetts, if the contribution from the company is more than 1/3 of what the unemployment benefit is, then any dollar above that gets offset against unemployment benefits. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the company to contribute at any rate more than 1/3 of the unemployment benefit eligibility.
Okay. So we've only got a couple of minutes left, but maybe let's transition into hopefully that time that we transition back to something called normal and employers starting to welcome their employees back. This essential, non-essential order is lifted. Talk about your advice for employers in bringing people back to work and dealing with employees who may express concerns about returning to the workplace. What's your advice in those circumstances?
Well, Section 5 of the OSHA Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, does require an employer to maintain a workforce that is free from hazards for employees. And there are, most recently, last several weeks ago, a number of employees raised their hands and said, look, I'm concerned about having to come into work, both because I commute on public transportation, and secondly, because I'm concerned that employees that I work closely alongside may have the virus, and either I myself are at risk from an immune deficiency, or perhaps I live with elderly parents. So, it is important that every company, listen to employees who say, I do have concerns. And we do expect that employees will continue to have concerns and potentially may have concerns after the order to close is lifted. As some employees may say, particularly those who are traveling on public transportation in close physical proximity to other passengers. So again, what some of our clients are doing are the ones who are operating right now are frequently providing other means of transportation to get essential employees into an essential business. I've got clients who are agreeing to pay for Uber or Lyft transportation. I agree that, look, it's not completely safe because the driver himself or herself may have the virus, but it hopefully does decrease the possibility of a transmission. So there's a lot of different issues, but I agree that a company needs to be thoughtful about before they would ever put a mandatory requirement that everyone immediately report to work, especially where an employee raises their hand and says, I've got legitimate concerns.
Right. And maybe one final question raised by that answer in OSHA requirements. Has this become, or might it become, a workers' comp claim type of issue?
Well, if an employee can show that he or she contracted the virus and suffered an injury or disease as a result of their work performance, as a result of performing work for the company, there's no reason why that wouldn't be a compensable workers' comp claim. Now, there is guidance, however, that says, well, gee, it's hard to show that it was contracted there. It could have been contracted anywhere. How can an individual show, where exactly it happened? So it's a tough show, but to the extent that the employee could demonstrate it, in theory, it would be subject to workers' comp. But in terms of causation, that's kind of an uphill battle.
Yeah, it strikes me that the bar would be pretty high. Christina, closing remarks or advices to getting information during this crisis?
No, other than say, this is a rapidly evolving situation, as everyone knows. And so, for example, the Department of Labor has issued guidance now 3 times, and it seems to be updated almost every 48 hours or so. So my best piece of advice is just to, keep hitting refresh on those things and make sure that you're looking at the latest that's available in terms of, guidance out there for employers by the Department of Labor, by OSHA, and by the CDC, because it is a quickly evolving thing and it seems to be updated constantly. But thank you for having us. We wish you all the very best with this time, in this time, and we hope that everybody is healthy and stays safe.
Great. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Brad. Thank you to Goodwin for making you available. I know Secretary Acosta has dropped off, but thank you to her as well for sharing all of your insights. Before I close, I want to highlight for those on the call our COVID-19 business resource page. You'll learn more about federal, state, local updates regarding the coronavirus, as well as upcoming virtual conversations that the Boston Chamber is hosting. So take a look at that website. We are making available the information that Secretary Acosta and firms like Goodwin are making publicly available on that website. So take a look at that. And we have a number of virtual programs coming up that you'll find on bostonchamber.com. But of note is a discussion and presentation by Eric Rosengren, President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, who will join us on a call at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Some of you may know that the Federal Reserve regional banks have substantial responsibilities with respect to the implementation of the CARES Act. So Eric Rosengren will share his insights into what's going on with the economy, as well as implementation of the CARES Act. I hope you can join us. And with that, thank you all for your time. And I will sign off the call right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.